I knew I would always be a mom. Like, it's what my goal was through everything. My goal through college, my goal through a career was to like be stable enough to be a mom. So when we started our fertility, our trying to conceive a child, I was 30, which I already felt was late to the game. I felt like I really wanted it earlier than that. I kind of envisioned myself being a young mom, but I think in our generation, it was just hard financially to afford that. So I was comfortable with 30, but I just thought, it was going to happen. It was going to happen quick. Once we decided, it would happen quick, and it did not. Yeah. So I started taking birth control when I was probably 18. And so I was on a hormonal birth control up until I stopped that for us to start trying to have a kid at 30. So 12 years of my life, I was on a hormonal birth control. And so on our journey, we just never got pregnant, ever. So that was just so weird. Like every 28 days, you're like peeing on a stick and like testing and hoping that it's positive, and you're seeing everyone around you have positive tests. My mom always told us that she got pregnant, like she thought about being pregnant and she got pregnant. And my older sister, same thing. Like when they tried, it happened within 2 months. And so I definitely just thought, my story would be the same, that I would get pregnant in the same window of like a couple months. And so I knew pretty early on, like something's not right, something's not working. So I tried that's when I started doing a lot of research on like Reddit or blogs and realizing, oh, you're not just like fertile the whole 28 days of your cycle, which I didn't realize. I think they really make you think you can get pregnant at any time when you're in sex ed classes when you're younger. And so that's when I realized, oh, maybe I could like figure out when I'm ovulating, and I can calendar that for us to make sure we're having sex then. And maybe I can like take my temperature, because that's part of ovulation too. Like your temperature spikes differently in different parts of your cycle. So I started doing that probably 6 months or so into trying. And that clearly didn't work either. I think I just assumed it would still happen. It definitely was a challenging topic for my husband and I too, which is it took a lot of the like, and you'll find this to be very common with anyone you talk to that went through infertility. It like took a lot of the romance out of it. It took a lot. It just like we were like scheduling sex based on when we thought we would ovulate, or like texting things to them like, oh, I think it's tonight, and it's like that's not romantic anymore. That's not like and we were newlyweds too. Like we'd gotten married in 2016, so it ended up becoming like a chore and a task and something we were scheduling, and our vision of like how to attack it and how to possibly diagnose it was very different for a long time too. And so there ended up being some resentment and tension there as well, because it was just like we both wanted to tackle it very differently, and the way the other one wanted to tackle it brought a lot of like mixed emotions for the other person too. So there was a lot behind the scenes as to why I think I waited for any sort of like doctor diagnosis. So I think he felt the pressure so much more than I did, like from me, right? And so you'll find this common too. A lot of times they feel like they're all of a sudden like a sperm bank for you, like that's their sole purpose. And I felt like he didn't want to address it or talk about it. So it's like a lot of things like that. So at some point we also went to a counselor to like talk through a lot of it too, which helped us tremendously. So it was probably late 2018. So like before we got in front of a counselor, it was probably like fall of 2018. So that was a good 2 years of us trying. Probably a little after a year of us trying is when we finally went to my OB, and my OB had him do a semen analysis, and then they had me go in for, gosh, I think it's called an HSG, a hysterosalpingogram. I think it's what it's called. But it's basically where they put dye through your tubes to see if your tubes are blocked, because that's a very common initial issue with infertility. And sometimes putting that dye through your tubes actually like pushes the blockage out. So then people get pregnant like the next cycle kind of thing. So that was a little bit of hope. I was like, oh, well, maybe this will just work. So the actual procedure itself, I think they tell you take some like ibuprofen, and then you go into this like huge cold sterile room and undress from the waist down, and you get on this big, it felt like it was like a metal table. You get on this like metal table with just one of those little like paper like sheets over you, right? And then just similar like a pap smear, they keep scooching down kind of thing with your legs in stirrups. And then I swear the doctor was like a really, really young male doctor that came in, and it's like, at that point had always had female OBGYNs, like this is so weird. And so he gets down there and he injects dye like through my uterus into my tubes. And it was uncomfortable for sure. I probably relate it to like a pap smear, because I'm sure that they like opened me up somewhat in order to like soften everything and like get access to things. And they said that I would have cramping for a little while after, and I think that same day I did. But I do remember on the table just being uncomfortable, but being overwhelmed with the emotions of it all. Because like, is this going to provide me answers? Is this going to solve it? Like, is it going to push a blockage through if I have a blockage? And so I remember tearing up a little bit on the table, and the nurse just like squeezing my hand a little bit more. And then they're just like done. It's like 5 minutes of that and they're done. And because they're taking x-rays to see where the dye is going through. Like, is the dye going all the way through your tubes to your ovaries, or is it getting stuck somewhere kind of thing? They didn't really find much of concern with my test. They said there was like a slight blockage in one, but the other one was open, so the semen could travel both ways, no problem. His semen analysis was abnormal in like all the different ways that they test semen, and so he did have issues with his semen analysis, where basically the OB said, you just need to go to a fertility doctor, because at this point you're probably going to have to go to do IVF. The OB was like, you're not going to get pregnant just naturally trying. And IUI, which is intrauterine insemination, which is where they like kind of like the turkey baster approach, where they take semen and put it into a woman while she's ovulating, that wouldn't work either, because we had issues with his sperm being able to like move forward appropriately, and the volume. So IUI already has a really low like percentage of success rates, but if you're dealing with like any sort of semen things, like IUI wouldn't solve that issue either. And so it was very likely we were going to need IVF. So in early 2019, I personally joined an infertility support group. And it was me and I think 12 other women in Orange County that all sat in a room together and talked about our different fertility journeys. Like, I had people that could relate to me. I had people that understood the grief, and because every single month that you get a negative test, or if you have a loss, we fortunately never had an actual loss, but every single month that you had a negative test, like, I was grieving. I was grieving the potential to be a mom. I was grieving like my purpose in life. I was grieving so many different things, and I was stressing and I was depressed. And so to have people that like got it, like completely got it, and we're just a safe space to like talk through any and all issues that come up around infertility. So at that point, pretty soon thereafter, I also was gaining a lot of resources from these women of like local doctors we could go to and things like that. So we set an appointment. I think I did a consult with 2 or 3 different reproductive endocrinologists, which are infertility doctors or IVF doctors in Orange County. We had 2 of them, picked our doctor, and like went to that first appointment. And what's it, April of 2019? We're around there. I remember at that office, when we finally got those results and we sat down with the doctor in his office, that's when we found out that my numbers were also not as normal as they should have been for, I think I was 33 at that time, maybe 32, just turning 33. I had like a lower hormone level than they would have hoped for. I had a lower egg quantity count that I would hope for. Because I think what a lot of people don't realize either, and I didn't, is when you're born with all the eggs you're going to have in your life. News to me. I didn't know that. So I think at that point they were estimating, and it's all an estimate, right? They don't know for sure when you're going to run out of your eggs in menopause, but they're like, you have less in your reserve than we would have thought for your age. And so we will do IVF cycles, but we'll probably get lower count than we would like to get, but hopefully we get good quality. Like that's what they're hoping for, like good quality over quantity for you. Just quick on that story, we did 2 IVF cycles with that doctor, and an IVF cycle is me injecting myself with hormones. Sometimes they're also suppositories. I never took a suppository, but a lot of people do. So it's injecting yourself with hormones, taking different pills for like anti-inflammation and different things like that. And then when they tell you like you have the most amount of what they think is the most amount of mature eggs all around the same size, they have you come in for an egg retrieval, which they put you under for, and they're in there for about 10-15 minutes, literally retrieving eggs out of your ovaries. I think they're aspirating them technically. And then that's kind of it. I think I thought this was it. This was going to be our answer. And like, all we have to do is like have our embryos made in a petri dish. And once that happens, like we'll get pregnant next cycle. Like it just always was like, oh, we found found the issue. We diagnosed it. We have a solution. It's going to work right away. And, that's actually something a doctor tends to say at that appointment. Like when you do that first true like consult appointment, they like end it saying, all right, let's get you pregnant. All right, let's get you a baby. So you're like, oh, okay. Like this is it, right? Like they found it. They don't warn you this might not work. They don't say this could be a long journey for you. And rightfully, because maybe not everyone needs to know all the facts, right? But there is like a sense of hope that like we just solved the problem and like we're going to get these eggs, we're going to make embryos, we're going to transfer it, I'm going to have a baby in like 11 months, So I think that my first retrieval, I had something like 17 eggs retrieved out of me. And they tell you that's the number they give you the day of your retrieval, like how many eggs they got. The next day they call you and they tell you how many of your eggs were mature of the 17 of however many they retrieved, and how many were implanted. Is it implanted? I think it's implanted. So I had 17 eggs and something like 12 were mature and like maybe 7 or 8 like successfully were joined with the sperms. So they're like lower numbers than they would expect based on like historical percentages for people. And then they call you 3 days later after that and they tell you, here's how many you have that are still growing and like becoming embryos. And then they'll call you 2 days later and say, this is how many made it to day 5. But our very first retrieval, we only had 1 embryo make it to day 5. We did this whole thing again with the same doctor about a month and a half or 2 months later. That time we also only had 1 embryo make it to freeze and testing for genetics. At that point, we haven't gotten into the cost, but we were 30,000+ into that doctor at that point, because probably more, but I think typically a retrieval plus all the meds for it, if you don't have any insurance coverage in Southern California, is probably 15 to 25,000. It just depends on which doctor and whether they do discounted pricing for like repeated cycles and things like that. So there's lots of different doctors do it a lot of different ways. And then to also test embryos for chromosomal abnormalities is a whole different cost as well. And those costs can range per embryo or from like batching a bunch of embryos together to get tested at one time. So we put a pause on it for a second because we were like, this isn't right. I think at that point we had over 25 eggs retrieved from me, and all we had were 2 embryos, and we hadn't done the chromosome testing yet on those 2 embryos. Because that doctor, they would do a 1 flat fee chromosome test cost per like 10 embryos or something. So we thought like if we get enough embryos, we'll just test them at once for the $2,000 or whatever it was. But since we didn't have enough, it was like, I don't know if I want to test these yet, because what if we have more embryos next time, right? So we put a pause. We called my support group, was really adamant that I consult with this other doctor that was in Orange County. So I ended up getting an appointment with him. I felt like a number at the other clinic. I felt like I wasn't being treated like a unique patient. I was just treated like, on average, this tends to work for all my patients. Whereas when I went to this doctor, got the lowest quantity of eggs I ever had, but my maturity rate was way higher. So he truly like got me higher quality eggs rather than just like fitting me into a schedule where like he triggered me where I had some eggs that were fully grown and some eggs that were smaller. Like most of my eggs were around the same size. And so they were all like mature around at the same time, and more of them were successfully able to like join with a sperm. So our calls with that doctor, like after the retrieval, were really good. They were like a high number joined with a sperm, and then on day 3, like a good number were growing. And then when he called on day 5, he's like, only one's growing. We were like, what? I thought, again, we thought this was it. We thought we found like the doctor that was going to help us and like create embryos for us. So there's a lot of things going through your head at that point. And for me, it was, I knew I wanted to be a mom. I knew I wanted to have a kid, but I also really always envisioned more than one kid. And so you're like, I only have 1 embryo. And if that even works, and the numbers haven't been on our side so far, but if that works, we would have to do all of this again, in 2 years or so, like, because you have to go through a pregnancy for 9 months, and then you need to breastfeed, and then you have to put your body through this again to try and give it a sibling, to like give that baby a sibling and grow your family more. And so there's part of you that's like, do we do another egg retrieval? But there's the cost of it. There's the financial toll, there's the mental toll, the physical toll, the relationship toll, and then the time delay. Like at this point, I'm approaching like 34, I think. So I was like 33, almost 34. And my doctor was like, I know you saying you had 3 retrievals, but I've only done 1 retrieval with you. And I'm really confident if we did another one, we could like tweak the dosages and it would be better. But we've always been told like the next one would work, right? The next one would have better results. And so it just didn't feel like something we were open to at that time. So what we decided to do was to implant or transfer the 1 normal embryo that we had and deal with whatever we needed to deal with down the line if we needed to. The transfer cycle is very different than a retrieval. It's like you you go into this room. You can have acupuncture if you want, but you're not put under or anything like that. And so we did that first. Then the doctor comes in, and then this lab tech comes in with like a little syringe, and she's like, "Are you Kaylee?" And I was like, "Yes." And she's like, "Okay, then this is your embryo," and like hands it to the doctor. And then they have on an ultrasound screen up there, and you can literally see this like tiny little like flash of light, and that's the embryo like being placed into your uterus. My doctor is like ultra conservative with like bed rest and house arrest in the like 5 days after your embryo transfer. He's like, why risk it? Like, why go on a walk or resume normal life? Because mentally you might kick yourself if like it didn't work. Like, man, should I have rested? Should I have not done anything? Right. So our doctor is like very conservative. It was a 3-day bed rest. So 10 days after your transfer, you go in for blood work, and they call it like your beta. Like you go in early in the morning, they'll call you around 2 or 3 with like your beta results. And it's to tell you if you're pregnant or not. You have to have a certain level of HCG in your blood to be deemed pregnant or not. And sometimes like normal pregnancies where people maybe have recurring losses, their OB will do the same kind of blood work. So that's not unique. It's just that it happens like somewhere between day 8, 9, and like 15 of fertilities cycles after transfer. And so my doctor pretty traditionally does them on like day 10, unless I think a day 10 falls on a Sunday, then he'll kick it to Saturday or Monday kind of thing. So I hadn't taken the pregnancy test at home for that transfer. And I was pretty confident I was pregnant. I felt like the nurses were like, "Oh, you're all smiling. Did you take a test?" And I was like, "No," but I'm pregnant. I just know it. I feel like I am. And then they call me, and the nurse was like, "Okay, I'm so sorry, but you're not pregnant." And I was like, "What?" And that's like at all? And she's like, "No, it's like 0." And it's like, 0? I was like, "There's not anything? Like, you're not just telling me I'm like having a miscarriage, right?" Like she's like, "No, it did not take. Like, it just didn't take." And I was just gutted. Like, that was it. Like, that was our embryo. That was like all the, the years up to that. Like, that was everything. And so, we ordered like a shit ton of Taco Bell, and just I went back into bed and I ate a ton of Taco Bell, and I called out from work, and I was always transparent with my work, so they knew what was going on. And I was like, "I'm not pregnant. I need a couple days." And they just like gut wrenching, because we were back to like ground zero. We had nothing. We had no embryos. We would have to do a whole nother retrieval again, but there's no guarantee because we had done 3, and that's all we had to show for it. And so I talked to my doctor about like, is it the egg? Like, would we have more success if we did egg donation? And he's like, no. And it's like, is it the sperm? Would we have more success if we did sperm donation? He's like, I can't guarantee that because we don't know why your eggs aren't all like mature either. So it's like we're dealing with like the duality of like potentially both of us having the issue that's causing us not to be able to make like viable embryos, but an uncertainty to it, like not knowing for sure which of the issues it is. So if we went the egg donation route or the sperm donation route, it might not necessarily result in us having embryos. A lot of clinics have like their own embryo donation like pools, where some of their previous patients are done building their families, and so they've left their remaining embryos to their clinics. And in that case, if you want to obtain embryos that way, you can get on a wait list with your clinic, and all the clinics do it a very different way. But I got on the wait list with my clinic, so just to like, because the wait list was like 8 or 9 months, I think, before they would call you to like let you see the embryos on the list. So when I got the list, if I saw a batch of embryos that all came from one donor, and that say there were 5 embryos, and I transferred one of those embryos and it worked, the remaining 4 go back into the pool for all other patients of my clinic. Mm-hmm. So let's just say in 2 years, I was ready to like try another transfer. I could hope that one of those same ones was there, but if it wasn't, I would then need to select a different like batch of embryos from a different donor. So it would not be biologically related to my child at all, or genetically related to my child at all. So that, I get the concept and I totally understand it. And I think that would be great. It didn't feel like the solution I wanted. I did feel very strongly that if I did have a child from embryo donation, that's already going to be like a unique experience for them. And so I would want them to have a sibling with the exact same, like, so they could have some sort of like sharing of like genetics and situation growing up that like they can relate, and maybe their physical traits would be similar, and their like their characteristics in life would be similar, right? So I felt strongly that I would not want to like have success and give the other embryos back into the pool with the chance that like those would be available in the future, because they might not be. Again, I think we were careful in that like our options were getting more limited and limited as we went through this process. So we would be open to virtually any way of becoming parents. But if given the choice or 2 options presented to us, we still knew what felt better for us. And so the other way you can find embryos is you can join certain like matching websites where there is a fee sometimes to like match with a couple that has embryos left over, but there's lots of different ways. So you can go from like closed to open, but you'll like know your donors, and your donors will know that you exist and whether you have offspring or not from the embryos, like a live birth. The other way is that there's like Facebook groups that you can join to find embryos. That's ultimately how we found our embryos. Was I joined several different Facebook groups that were specifically to like link up donors with recipients. So we were on the matching sites in the Facebook groups for a couple of weeks probably, and chatting with a couple different donors. So there was someone that commented on a thread, and I think some of the groups all do it differently, but this one was like, you can just comment on this thread if you have embryos to give. And if you say, hey, you can message me, then people are allowed to message you. It's like very like active permission kind of thing. And so a couple or a person had commented, we have embryos. We're done building our family. We are a same-sex like lesbian couple. We're in Colorado. We are not interested in anyone that would not be okay with having embryos from a same-sex couple. Like, you have to be progressive in that sense and be good people. And I was just like, okay, I don't care. Like, we are very progressive. We didn't mind at all, because I could see in the threads a lot of people that did. So I was like, and that's fine. Like, that's their decision how they want to do it. But I was like, oh, we meet the bill, right? Like, this is cool. So I messaged her. It all just like felt really good. They told us that they had a call the next day with a single woman that was going to be a single mother by choice, to maybe give some of the embryos to her too. So on the call with us, they said, we really like you. We'll give you some of our embryos, because they had a lot of embryos left over. So I found attorneys. I found their attorney for them to use, because the recipients pay for the attorneys on both sides in a process like this. I contacted my lab. I contacted their lab, like, to figure out how to literally get the embryos from their lab to our lab and everything. So I just, like, the second they were like, we want you, I was like, I'll run with it. They're like, great. And so I just ran with it all. And it's been pretty seamless, like, ever since, and ever, like, chatting with them or talking with them. So that was, I think we met them in, like, probably August of 2020 on Zoom. And by October-ish of 2020, the embryos were legally ours and in our possession. So on December 1st of 2020, we transferred the highest viable embryo that we were gifted or donated. And that embryo was a success. And in July of 2021, we had our daughter. I couldn't imagine her being anything different. Like, I literally don't know what, if our one embryo had worked, or if we had ever conceived naturally, like, I still picture her, which is like, it's because I don't know any different, but like, she just fully seems like she is ours, and she is, and I couldn't picture anything else. So when she turned a year, I knew, because at that point I had just turned 36, I needed to quickly decide. We were already getting older. My husband was going to turn 39 that year. So we knew we'd need to decide pretty quick if we want to have another, if we want to give her a sibling, and if we wanted to have another kid. So at that point, I called the doctor and I was like, what's next steps? And he's like, you'll come in, you'll do a mock cycle just to see if your hormones have like rebalanced, because I was breastfeeding Lucy. So I think we did that in like September or so. And then we almost were on the exact same cycle. We, in December, did an embryo transfer of like our next best embryo, which was a little boy. And that also was a successful embryo transfer that resulted in him being born. And that's our son now. So they're about 25 months apart. I feel like we're a unique generation, and in a unique time with technology, that you don't have to go through anything alone. You don't have to go through like pregnancy alone. You don't have to go through labor alone. You don't have to go through infertility alone. Like, someone out there has the same story as you, or can relate to your story. So I had definitely wished that I had joined a support group sooner. I'd wish I had known about all my options sooner. But you know, our story might not be what it is now had I done that. But there was a really low period of time where I was very, very depressed. And once I reached out and like found that my story was not only like not unique, but like really common, and like no one talked about it. It was just like, oh, okay, like this is really common.